The reason why my lager tastes so good and so refreshing is because we harvest our barley the old-fashioned way, the traditional way, the Cotswolds way.
Jeremy Clarkson once called beer dishwater. Now he's sitting on top of a multi-million-pound brewery built from barley nobody wanted to buy. In this video, we're unpacking how that actually happened. Why a rejected harvest turned into a business idea nobody saw coming. Why the water alone might be the real secret behind the taste. How a deal with one of the world's biggest brewers got this beer into thousands of pubs almost overnight. The banned advert that turned a mistake into free national publicity. And the one pub, hiding in plain sight, that's quietly the smartest move in the whole operation. Let's get into all of it. From failed barley to big business. To understand this brewery, you have to understand what actually happens when a harvest goes wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly, quietly wrong, in the way that ruins a farmer's year without anyone outside agriculture ever hearing about it. Barley destined for major lager brands has to meet a spec sheet most people would find absurd. Protein levels within a narrow band, moisture content within a narrow band, consistency across an entire crop grown outdoors, at the mercy of British weather, which is to say, at the mercy of nothing predictable at all. Fall outside those numbers by a fraction, and the big brewing houses won't touch it. Not because the barley is bad, because it doesn't fit a formula built for scale, not for individual farms having a normal, slightly imperfect year. That's roughly what happened on Clarkson's farm in the Cotswolds. The barley wasn't a disaster, it just wasn't the exact grade the major contracts demanded. For most farmers, that's a bad year you write off and try again next season. For Clarkson, sitting on a barn of barley that technically failed to be perfect, it became a different kind of question entirely. If nobody wants to buy this from me, what happens if I turn it into something myself? It's worth pausing on how unusual that reaction actually is. Farming margins in Britain are brutal enough that most people in that position think about survival, not expansion. Building a brewery from scratch means regulatory approval, serious capital, a supply chain that doesn't exist yet, and a British drinks market already crowded with thousands of craft breweries, all fighting for the same handful of pub taps. There's licensing to sort out, excise duty on every litre produced, food safety inspections, and enough paperwork to talk most first-time founders out of the idea before a single pint gets brewed. Anyone with actual experience in the drinks trade would have laid out exactly why this was a bad idea, and they'd have been reasonably correct to do so. Clarkson built it anyway, and that's really the first thing worth understanding about this whole story. Not that he had some genius master plan from day one, but that he was willing to be the kind of stubborn that turns a bad harvest into a new business rather than a write-off. Television has turned that stubbornness into a punchline for years, mostly played for laughs on his farming show. Here, it happened to actually work. The brand name leans into exactly the identity you'd expect. British, rural, unapologetically local. And that identity turned out to matter a lot more than a first-time brewer might have guessed. Because the story of "this beer exists because a farmer refused to waste his crop" is a much stronger hook than almost anything an actual advertising agency could invent from scratch. What's easy to miss, buried under the farming drama and the television theatrics, is that the founding problem, barley that didn't fit the big brewer's spec, never fully goes away. Every harvest still carries the same risk. A bad summer, an early rain, a crop that misses the grade again. Except now, instead of that being a disaster, it's simply an input for the brewery itself. The business effectively turned an unpredictable weakness in British farming into the raw material for a company that doesn't need perfect barley in the first place, just barley that's genuinely good. That's a small but important distinction. This isn't a celebrity slapping his name on somebody else's product. The entire business exists because of a specific, ordinary agricultural problem that Clarkson happened to be standing in the middle of when he decided not to accept the usual answer. Most people would call that luck. It's closer to noticing an opportunity that was sitting in plain sight the whole time, because nobody else farming that land had a television show, an audience, or the appetite to build a brewery out of a bad harvest. And that's before you even get to whether the beer itself is any good, which, it turns out, is where this story gets genuinely interesting. The taste behind the success. There's a very specific trap that celebrity drink brands fall into, and it's worth naming directly. They taste like nothing except the marketing budget. Britain in particular has years of these. A famous name, a slick bottle, a launch party, and a product that quietly disappears from shelves within 18 months because nobody buys a second bottle once the novelty wears off. This brand's survival past that 18-month mark isn't an accident, and it isn't really about Clarkson's fame either. It comes down to something far less glamorous: water, geography, and the decision not to cut corners that almost every commercial brewery cuts as a matter of course. Start with the water, because it genuinely matters more than people assume. The Cotswolds sits on a limestone aquifer, and water that filters through that kind of geology tends to come out soft, low in sulfates, and gently alkaline. Conditions that brewers have chased for centuries because they suit lager production particularly well. It's not a coincidence that entire brewing regions in continental Europe grew up around similar limestone geology. This brewery's water comes straight from springs on Clarkson's own land, which means the business isn't buying a flavor advantage. It's sitting on top of one. Then there's the barley, grown, in a good year, within a few miles of where it's malted and brewed, alongside British-grown hops, rather than the imported ingredients most mass-market lagers rely on to hit a price point. The brewing method itself follows a slower, colder, more patient version of traditional lager production, the kind that takes longer and costs more than the fast fermentation shortcuts most commercial breweries have quietly adopted to save time and money. None of that guarantees a good beer on its own. Plenty of breweries have excellent water and still make something forgettable. What it does is remove the excuses. If the beer tasted mediocre, there wouldn't be much left to blame. Not the water, not the barley, not the process. The fact that it's developed a real repeat purchase audience rather than a one-time novelty crowd suggests the product is actually doing the work that the marketing alone couldn't. There's also a less measurable factor worth mentioning, and it's Clarkson's own reputation, oddly enough working in the product's favor rather than against it. This is a man who has spent a career on television publicly and enthusiastically tearing apart products he thinks are bad: cars, gadgets, restaurants, other people's decisions. Attaching his name to a beer he privately thought was mediocre would be a strange, self-sabotaging move for someone whose entire public persona is built on having opinions and being loud about them. Whether that's a deliberate strategy or simply a byproduct of who he is, the effect is the same. His reputation functions as an informal quality check that a paid celebrity endorsement usually can't provide. The clearest evidence that the product itself is carrying real weight shows up not in the initial sales spike after the beer appeared on his farming show, but in what happened after that spike. Celebrity-backed drinks brands almost always follow the same curve. A rush of curious buyers right after a launch or a TV appearance, followed by a steep drop-off once the initial audience has tried it once and moved on. This brand kept climbing well past that point, on a curve that had far more to do with people actually enjoying what was in the glass than with anything happening on a television schedule. That's the part worth sitting with for a second, because it's the difference between a business built on a moment and a business built to last. Fame gets a product noticed. It doesn't get a product bought twice. Whatever's happening here, it's clearly clearing that second bar. And that's what turns a viral farming subplot into an actual company with actual staying power. The secret behind Clarkson's rapid expansion. Making a genuinely good beer is one problem. Getting it into people's hands is an entirely different, and in some ways much harder, 1. And this is where the story stops being a nice farming anecdote and starts looking like an actual business case study. British pub culture runs on a system that isn't especially welcoming to new brands, celebrity-backed or otherwise. Landlords have been burned before by the next big thing that vanished within a year, and getting a new product into rotation at scale means convincing thousands of individual venues, one relationship at a time, that it's worth the shelf space and the tap line. Doing that at a handful of trendy bars in a big city is achievable for almost anyone with a decent product and some charm. Doing it at thousands of pubs, proper market town pubs, motorway services, the kind of places that make up the actual backbone of British drinking culture, rather than the curated version you see online, in under 3 years, is a completely different scale of problem. The detail that tends to get lost under the more entertaining farming footage is that this brewery's distribution got serious backing from a major international drinks company. That's not a small thing. When one of the world's largest brewers agrees to distribute a product, it solves the two problems that quietly kill more small drinks brands than bad reviews ever do: getting the product cold and getting it into the right place at the right time, consistently, at a scale no single farm-based brewery could manage on its own. Television opened the door with the audience. The distribution partnership got it behind the bar. And once a beer is actually sitting behind the bar, next to the usual big names, it stops needing a celebrity to sell it. It just needs to be good enough that people order it again. The supermarket side of the story follows a similar pattern, and it's worth understanding just how difficult that route actually is, because most people massively underestimate it. Getting a product onto the shelf at a major British supermarket chain isn't a phone call and a handshake. It's listing fees, promotional commitments, and shelf space negotiations that have sunk far better funded companies than a Cotswolds farm with a TV show attached. This brand got through that door largely because supermarket buyers had already watched the show and knew there was a built-in audience willing to try it. But, and this is the distinction that actually matters, the show got them the meeting. It didn't get them the reorder. That part came down to the product holding up once it was actually on the shelf. If you're finding this as interesting as I am, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because the next part of this story, the bit almost nobody talks about, is honestly the cleverest piece of the whole operation. That's the part of the strategy worth pausing on, because it's easy to assume Clarkson's fame did all the heavy lifting here, and it clearly didn't. Fame opens doors that would otherwise stay firmly shut to a small regional brewery. It cannot, on its own, keep a product on a supermarket shelf once the initial curiosity fades, or keep a landlord reordering a keg after the first one runs dry. Those decisions get made on margins, reliability, and whether customers keep asking for it by name, the same unglamorous metrics every other beer in Britain gets judged on. This brand built a distribution network that most independent breweries would need a decade to assemble. And it did it by pairing a story people wanted to believe with a product that didn't let them down once they'd bought in. The pub trick behind Clarkson's beer empire. Every business story like this eventually gets to the part where the marketing team does something bold, and traditionally, that's where things go wrong. This brand's version of bold marketing involved an advert built around real farmers, real mud, real wind-battered faces, and a phrase enthusiastic enough that Britain's advertising regulator decided the public couldn't be trusted to hear it on television. The ad got banned. Getting banned should, in theory, be a failure. There was a real risk attached to it. A banned ad can just as easily read as a brand trying too hard. Or worse, as a genuine misstep that damages trust rather than building it. Most companies spend months in legal review specifically trying to avoid this outcome, because a regulator stepping in usually means bad headlines and an embarrassing climb down. Instead, it turned into a story the press wanted to cover for free, spreading further through news coverage, trade publications, and online arguments than any paid campaign of a similar size could have managed. People who had never heard of the brand were suddenly searching for the advert just to see what all the fuss was about, which is, In effect, a marketing campaign that pays for itself by being talked about rather than being watched. Whether that outcome was intentional or simply a byproduct of Clarkson being exactly as loud as he always is on television, the effect was the same. A controlled bit of chaos turned into free, widespread attention, and attention in the drinks industry is close to everything. Most breweries this size would need a marketing budget several times their annual revenue to buy that kind of reach. This one got it from a ruling that was, on paper, supposed to be a punishment. But the actual hidden part of this operation, the bit that rarely gets a mention next to the funnier farming stories, is a pub Clarkson opened as part of the whole project. On paper, it looks like a fairly normal move for someone building a food and drink brand. Open a flagship pub, get some good press, give fans somewhere to visit. Underneath that, something considerably smarter is happening. The pub runs almost entirely on British-sourced ingredients, priced accordingly, which means the food side of the business likely operates on thin margins at best, not unusual for pubs generally, most of which treat food as a way to get people through the door rather than as a primary profit center. What makes this pub different is what it sells to drink. It pours the house lager, and only the house lager, at every table. That matters more than it sounds like it should. In a normal pub, when a customer orders a well-known lager, a meaningful cut of that sale goes straight to the outside brewer, and the landlord keeps a smaller slice. That's simply how the tied house and supply arrangements in British pubs have worked for decades. Here, the landlord and the brewer are the same operation. Every pint sold at that pub keeps its full margin inside the same business, rather than splitting it with an outside brewing company. The food might be a loss leader, the beer isn't. And the pub itself does at least 4 jobs at once. It's a working pub, a filming location that feeds content back into the show that built the audience in the first place, a showcase where new visitors try the product in its best possible setting, and a retail outlet with a queue that regularly outpaces what the building was ever designed to handle. That's the quiet piece of business logic, sitting underneath a project that, from the outside, looks like a farmer messing about with a side project for the cameras. Nothing about that pub is accidental. It's a closed loop. The show drives visitors to the pub sells the beer at full margin, the beer's popularity feeds back into the show's storylines, and the whole cycle reinforces itself without needing to buy a single extra unit of advertising to do it. Every part of the operation is quietly feeding every other part. It's worth adding one more layer here, because it's easy to treat the pub and the band advert as separate stories when they're really doing the same job from different angles. Both of them generate attention or margin without relying on the traditional, expensive route most drinks brands are forced to take: paid advertising, promotional deals, discounting to move volume during quiet months. That third option, discounting, is where most small drinks businesses eventually end up when sales dip, because it's the fastest way to protect a revenue number on a spreadsheet. It's also, in the long run, one of the most damaging things a brand can do to itself. Because once customers learn to wait for a lower price, they rarely go back to paying full price willingly. Instead of following that playbook when sales inevitably dipped over a slow winter, the brand actually leaned the other way. Rather than discounting the lager to protect revenue, it introduced a heavier seasonal ale built for exactly that time of year, betting that loyal customers would rather pay full price for something new than watch their favorite drink get marked down and cheapened in the process. That bet paid off, and it's a small but telling example of a business that would rather build something new than devalue what it already has. It's the same instinct that shows up in the pub and the band advert. Find a way to create value or attention without giving away margin to get it. The bigger business story. Step back from the pint glasses and the pub queues for a second, because there's a bigger story sitting underneath all of this. And it's the reason people in agriculture have paid closer attention to this brewery than the tabloid headlines might suggest. British farming has been squeezed for years by a combination that doesn't leave much room for optimism. Shrinking subsidies, commodity prices that swing wildly from one season to the next, and margins so thin that younger generations increasingly look at the family farm and decide the numbers simply don't work anymore. The countryside that looks beautiful in photographs is, financially, one of the more brutal places to try to run a small business in Britain. What this brewery represents, whether or not it was ever planned this deliberately, is one possible answer to that problem. Grow something. Add value to it, rather than selling it as a raw commodity at whatever price a buyer is willing to offer that year. Control the route to market instead of handing that control to somebody else further up the supply chain, and tell the story of what's actually been made, with enough honesty and personality that people care where it came from, rather than treating it as an interchangeable product on a shelf. None of that is a new idea. Small distilleries, farm shops, and independent cheesemakers across Britain have been building exactly this kind of model for years, usually without much recognition beyond their local area or a county show stall. What this brand has done differently is prove the same model can work at a national scale, with national distribution, without losing the local story that made it worth paying attention to in the first place. It's also worth remembering this isn't just a marketing story on paper. It's an actual employer in a market town economy where steady work isn't something to take for granted. A working brewery, a flagship pub, and a growing distribution operation all need staff: brewers, drivers, kitchen teams, front-of-house workers. In a part of the country where young people often have to leave to find decent employment, a business like this quietly keeps a meaningful number of jobs local, which is a far less flashy story than a banned advert, but arguably a more important one. There's also a quieter, longer-term piece to this that's easy to miss next to the sales figures. The brewery runs tours for actual school children, not corporate hospitality trips, walking groups of 11 and 12-year-olds through the entire process, from field to fermentation tank to delivery lorry. It's a genuinely useful science lesson. Brewing touches on chemistry, biology, and supply logistics all at once. But it's also, whether or not it's framed this way out loud, the longest and cheapest marketing campaign the brand could possibly run. A generation of kids who've stood inside a working British brewery and understood, properly, where a pint actually comes from will be old enough to buy one themselves within a decade. Most of them will remember which brand showed them that, rather than which one simply bought advertising space near their favorite show. Put all of it together: the farm providing raw material, the television show providing marketing reach no brewery could otherwise afford, a flagship pub protecting margin and generating content, a distribution partnership doing the heavy logistical lifting, and a slow-building relationship with the next generation of customers. And what looks from a distance like a farmer's chaotic side project starts to look like something closer to a genuinely well-constructed small business, built by someone with no formal background in brewing or retail, largely by refusing to accept the first no he was given. That's really the through line of the entire story, if there is one. Not that Clarkson is secretly a business genius who planned every move years in advance. By his own admission, plenty of this happened by accident, or by simple stubbornness rather than strategy. What's actually impressive is the discipline shown after the accidents, refusing to discount when discounting was the obvious move, protecting the reputation of the product rather than chasing a quick sale, and building a distribution network patiently instead of relying entirely on fame to do the selling. Luck opened the first door. What's kept the business growing since then has had very little to do with luck at all. So there it is, beer that began as barley nobody wanted, now sitting in thousands of pubs because of water, patience, and a refusal to cut corners. A distribution deal solved what most small breweries never manage. A banned advert turned into free publicity no budget could buy. And that one pub, quietly keeping every penny of its own beer margin, is still the smartest move nobody talks about. None of this happened because Clarkson is famous. Fame opened the first door. The product did the rest. If this pulled back the curtain, subscribe. There's more hiding behind the headlines.